All right. Looks like I've got my audio working. So now if you're here, just let me know. Tell me if you are listening in now that my voice is audible once again. I'll restate what I already said, which was previously said silently. I'm here broadcasting to you as usual, at 4 o'clock on Monday for video game design with EdAlliance. If you're just tuning in, of course, we've been working on a game for the past few weeks, and I'm super excited to continue to work on development for the projects our on the ground studio team has been working on. Um, so if you are part of that team and you are tuning in today, definitely let me know. I will give you a shout out and just hop into some tutorial stuff. It looks like David is there in the chat. So, hey, David, if you're lurking, that's cool. I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about here. And of course, if you happen to have questions about your game or anything game development related, just let me know because I will answer your questions. Hey, I see Emmy in the chat. Good to see you, Emmy. Awesome. Glad you're here. Cool. I don't know if Dan's joining us today, but I am here. Looks like Emmy's here, and we've got David. Hopefully, Neural is along for the ride. I was actually going to start with something from Neural's game, so I'll try to delay for a few more minutes. Make sure we give Neural a chance to roll in. Um, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about where we're at in the process of making this game. And then when I'm done talking about that, we'll hop in and do some game dev. I see Emmy in the chat is saying my collab button disappeared, so we can start with troubleshooting that when we get into Unity today. So I'm just going to pop up a website here. And give me a second here to bring this live. Whoops, that's not the one I want to do. Sorry, having technical difficulties. I'll be with you guys in just a second when I can get this to be the correct size. Yes, for whatever reason, that one is huge. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and I'll just talk about it. Um, so what I wanted to tip you guys off. Hey, I see Neural there in the chat. Hey, Neural, I'm back. Just trying to show you guys a website. I'm using a different streaming software today. It's a lot more powerful, but it's making my windows appear huge on the stream, so I can't show you a website right now. Um, but no worries, I'll get it. I'll get it set up for you guys next time. And the thing I wanted to talk about today is, of course, where we are at in the game making process. So, it's tempting to tunnel into solving engineering problems, and that is what we love about game making. But I also wanted to talk about uh, making sure you know that you're on the right track. So, with that in mind, go to makeroom.elinedmedia.com/online-learning, and you can remind yourself that the game is due on April 30th. We're going to review games next week. Once again, I'll be looking at your prototypes on the cast on April 27th. And if you check our blog on the Make Room website, you would see that we do indeed have a number of articles on the blog talking about where you should be at in the process of working on your game. So, where you should be at right now, and I see the majority of people who are with us in this team are actually right on track to do this. You should be working on introducing challenges into your game. Introducing challenges into your game is where you should be at. I know you guys have gotten mechanics worked out, and in some cases, this would be particularly towards David's game. There are already some challenges introduced there. So we're talking about challenges in terms of not just having them, but using them to make the gameplay really compelling and really fun. I'm seeing Narelle in the chat saying, I can't finish my game because I've moved into a new house and I do not have internet, so I have to use my phone's hotspot and my desktop is not even set up. Oh my gosh, Narelle, you moved! Well, congratulations. I hope your new house is a nicer house than your old house. And no worries if you can't work on your game in the next 2 weeks for the April 30th challenge deadline. I have some good news for you guys, which is that in the month of May, we haven't formalized this, so stay tuned for the actual announcement. But what we're thinking of doing is offering the month of May as a full month of tutorials and deadlines surrounding the idea of polishing a game so that you can release it on a forum like itch.io or another area on the internet where people actually publish games. So if you get a little behind in the month of April, which is about being creative and playing around with a challenge, then be excited because you could work on this same game in May, or you could work on another game that you really want to take to that next level. So hopefully, Narelle, that's good for you. Maybe it'll take you a couple weeks to get the internet set up. I know that during the pandemic, it's like everything's different and oh my gosh, it probably takes way longer. So don't worry. Just do what you can do. We have these live casts here for you to watch. So even if you're not doing game development, it's totally worth it to tune in and listen to us talk about coding and game development so you don't lose track and then you can dive back in. Awesome. He's saying tomorrow he might have internet. So all is not lost. You can still turn in a game. So you guys should be working on challenges in your gameplay. And if there are any loose ends to tie up in setting up your core mechanic, those are things that you should resolve right now too. So I wanted to give you guys a couple different examples in Unity. The first example, I'm going to do some programming and set up in Narelle's game project to show you some tips and tricks and best practices for implementing mechanics effectively. And then I'm going to hop into Emmy's game and talk about setting up challenges. So that's the plan for today. But of course, if people ask questions, I will I'll insert tutorials and explanations to answer anything you guys are working on. We need to get Emmy's collab button working again, so that's definitely going to be something we'll address today. David, again, if something specific is going on in your game that we can help with, now is also definitely the time to tip us off about that. All right, so without further ado, I wanted to hop into Unity and, I messed this up so bad. Let's get rid of this. Narelle's like, where's Natalie? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm having an issue here where my Unity thing is absolutely enormous. So let me see if I can get this to be the right size so we can see what we're doing here. This is looking better. Yes. All right. So we've got Unity here on the screen, and you'll just hear my voice today as I take you through what I was working on in Neural's game. So check it out, guys. Last week when I was casting, Neural said he needed ideas. And what I was thinking about in his game project last time was I think I remember suggesting this if you guys were there. I suggested that we do something. This is looking very, very weird. What is going on? We were talking about doing something that had to do with um, making it so you could get in and out of a car since Norel had set up something that looked like this. He had put the furnace cabin out in a scene and then the car right out in front. So I was thinking about that and I said to myself, it would be cool to set up a system in Norel's project that sort of allows me to, walk around in the cabin and then get in the car. And so I spent some time today working this out, and I wanted to talk to you guys about how I did that, just to give you an idea of how this thought process takes place when you sit down to work on a core mechanic for a game. So I'm going to show you guys the finished product before I show you the code. I've got my furnished cabin here, and I've got the first-person controller inside the cabin. I open the doors. I walk out to the car. Okay, so when I get near it, I get some nice text here that says press C to enter car. When I press C, here I am in my alternate player controller configuration, and I can drive my car around. Hopefully I don't drive off the edge of the map, but if I do, then so be it. So I can drive, and then if I want to get out, I have this thing up here that says press E to exit. I press E, and now I'm out of the car again. So, Neural, if you're watching, you should be very excited because I coded this for you and pushed it into your project. But I wanted to show you guys kind of what I went through in the process of thinking about how to do this so I could actually implement that system effectively. Neural, what I'm hoping is that with this code in your hands, you'll be able to take a stab at developing something similar. If you have a better idea, I see he's saying thanks, but I have a better idea. That's fantastic. Do your idea. This will be an example of a way of working out a game system. And my hope is you guys can extrapolate from this example and use it in your own games. So what happened here is I wanted to start with a player controller, which is of course this FPS controller here. You can see it sort of hanging out right there with all of its doohickeys and attachments. And I wanted to actually be able to switch to a different player controller when I click a button nearby the car. And, one of the things that's cool about being able to do this is if I can rig up this type of code to work, I have the ability to switch between different kinds of controls dynamically whenever I want to in my game. So another example of this would be, for example, if I were David and I wanted to create a situation where when I click on the TV, I enter into a different gameplay state where I'm playing a 2D game. There's a similar type of logic that you would use as the logic that I used when I was implementing this switch to the car system that I made up for Neural's project. So what I said to myself, first of all, was I need to figure out a way to switch between the first-person player controller and the car controller. So I need to make a script where the script contains a method that I can call to switch between the two controllers. So I'm going to go ahead and open Visual Studio here, and I will show you guys the first script I wrote. All right. So here's my Visual Studio window, and what I said to myself when I sat down to do this is, I said to start, I'm going to need to code up a script that allows me to switch between the two player controllers. Before I did that, though, what I needed to do is I needed to actually set the two player controllers up in the scene that I have running. So I already had my first person player controller set up in here as we were looking at before. And to create a player controller setup for the car that I could switch into and out of, I put the car in the scene. And then I also put this multi-purpose camera rig in the scene, which we've previously identified as something you can find in the standard assets and is a reasonably good camera setup to use with this pre-built Unity car. So I dropped the car in, I dropped the multi-purpose camera rig in, and then with both of those player controllers in there, I said, now it's time for me to code up a script that switches between those two when I push the keys that I've configured as my switchers between the two states. So in the script here, the first thing I did was I said, okay, I'm going to create a method called set controls. It's going to take a parameter that's a string, and then depending on if the string I pass in is car or FPS, I'm going to run some logic that turns on the corresponding control schema. So when I call set controls, I make it so the car isn't locked in place. I set the car's camera active. I tag its camera as the main camera in the scene. I get component on AutoCam, which is a script attached to the car camera, which is the multi-purpose camera rig, and I make sure it's targeting the car. I enable user control on the car. I enable audio, and I deactivate the entire game object of the first-person character controller. Next, if I want to pass in the string FPS here, I do the reverse. I turn off the car's camera, I disable its user control, I turn off its sounds, and then I activate the first person shooter controller, and I also freeze the car in place. So this stuff is the first step really that I went through in thinking through this system situation. I said, I need a script that has a method that can turn on and off the two different control sets, and also not just turn them on and off, but when one is on, it automatically turns the other one off. Because of course I don't want to, run my player controller and have two things moving around at once. Funnily enough, if you do actually do this, it's funny. You can have the first person player controller in the scene and also the car in the scene. And when you push play and try to control the first person avatar, you can see the car moving. So it was funny when I started doing this, I threw the car in there and I hit play, and then I saw the car driving around outside as though it were possessed. Um, so, we want to, we want to turn off the car when I'm in the first person and vice versa. So some other things to show you guys about this script. Um, I have a few public variables defined at the top, and these are references to the car's camera, the car itself, and then that first person shooter game object. I didn't get the camera for the first person shooter because the camera is actually a child of that game object. So I can turn the whole thing on and off just with that one object. Here I initialize the script by starting out in a default state of the first person controller being on and the car controller being off. Okay, so I said to myself, I need two player controllers in the scene. I need code that sets which player controller I'm using, which is this code. And then I had to ask myself, what would be the in-game situation that would allow me to switch between the two player controllers? So I'd say to myself, what do I need to do, or what situation do I need to be in to move out of the first person controller and into the car? So that would be my next step. So here, I'm going to actually share with you guys in the chat here the process I went through. I said, first, I need to set up my two player controllers. I said, I need to set up a player game object. I need to set up a camera for each of the two states of being. And then my next thing is I need to do some code that sets which player controller I'm using. So those were my first two steps. And then I said, now when can I switch between those two states? And to attend to that, of course, I actually started thinking about the way this would work in gameplay. So what I wanted, of course, and we know this from the discussion from last time when I was proposing this idea to Narelle, is I wanted to be able to walk up to the car and get into it. So part of what that means is I need to make it so that I can't just get in the car at any time. So yeah, it'd be weird if I could press a button right now and suddenly I'm in a car. So of course, the functionality I want is what I have here, which is now I'm near the car so I can enter into it. Here I am in it, and then I get out of it again. So thinking about that, the natural conclusion is that we're going to do something with what? What would we attach to the car? You guys know. We would attach a trigger. So what I needed to do was set up a trigger volume surrounding the car so that I'm only able to switch into the car controls when I'm near this game object. And so that is what I did. On this car, I added a sphere collider. This could be a box. It doesn't have to be a sphere, but whatever collider shape you choose, it needs to be a trigger. And then once I had set that trigger up, I actually created a separate script called get in car. Now, I wanted to talk to you guys about this for a second because it's a common phenomenon that you'll see in assets you download. There will often be multiple scripts that handle one type of gameplay interaction. And the reason you end up with that is because it can be nice to separate when you're writing scripts, the scripts that give low-level system functionalities like this basic switching between first person and car controls that I wanted to do. And then separately from that, scripts that actually take player input and handle specific gameplay situations that you might want to tweak and change. So often, for example, when you download like an avatar, you might encounter a situation where you get a script called user control or user input, and then a character controller that does the underlying physics to actually move that character around. So it's just a nice way to set it up to clarify what is contained in what script. So you'll notice, in fact, if I go back to my Visual Studio situation here, this script I wrote to switch between the car and the FPS actually doesn't have an update method in it. It has start, which initializes a state, and then it just has this method. So this script actually just sort of hangs out as a helpful set of behaviors or functionalities that I can trigger when something happens in the game. It's not actually really running and doing things like scripts that use the update method do. So now it was time to actually program my gameplay. I created this second script called get in car. So here's get in car. And what you'll notice in this script is there is an update function. And I'm handling two important aspects of gameplay in this script. One of them has to do with trigger interactions. The other one has to do with that UI text I display when you enter the trigger and when you're inside the car. So I would say if you looked at this script kind of at a stepped back level, half of it is just interacting with the trigger to switch the two controls, and the other half of it is managing UI text. So if you look down here in the update function, you see I have some basic variables here that are self-explanatory in what they do. There's near car and there's in car. And if we interrogate what these are, we would find out that near car is set to true when I enter the trigger on the car, and it's set to false when I exit the trigger on the car. Similarly, in car is set to true when I call set controls, which is the method I wrote in my other script. So let's expand that out a little bit. I've actually got a reference here to the other script I wrote, the one I just showed you, which is called Player Controls Manager. And what this enables me to do actually is when I write public player controls manager PCM, I can now drag the empty game object with that script attached into the corresponding field in the inspector. And I'll be able to interact with any methods that I have written in that script that are public. So just to show you guys what that would look like, in Unity, I've got this player controls manager game object here with my control manager script, which of course switches back and forth between the two control schemas, first person and car. And then here in car, I've attached my get in car script. And if I want to use that method I wrote called set controls, I just drag player controls manager right in this field. And now once again, visiting Visual Studio, we could remind ourselves that this line of code is responsible for that relationship. So I've got PCM here, and when I'm near the car, if I press C, and I'm not already in the car, because of course we want to manage some potential for encountering bugs here. Um, I'm going to call set controls in PCM, which is my player controls manager script. I'm going to set in car as true, and then I'm going to deactivate that text that says press C to enter car. Meanwhile, with in car true, I've got this condition here that basically shows the in car text, which has a different button to exit the car, and a few other little nice code things here. In particular, when I exit the car, the FPS player controller is relocated to a point that's right next to the car. And if I didn't do this, of course, that avatar would just like reappear over wherever I got in the car the last time. Because when I do my control switch, that one is deactivated and it just sits where it was. So I need to relocate it to a logical location, which in this case is standing sort of next to the driver's side of the car. And then when I do that, I once again call set controls and I pass in the word FPS, which, if we remember from the original script, will turn off the car controls and turn the FPS controls on. So that's pretty much how this script functions. So again, on trigger enter, just setting whether or not I'm near the car and which text I can see. And then that near car Boolean is controlling the code I run in update. The logic for switching between car and FPS is all hidden from me here in this script, which is a really nice situation because I don't have to worry about all the logic I was doing around turning the camera on and off, turning the audio on and off. The only logic I have in this script relates with text and the trigger. And I would really advocate separating your stuff into different scripts like this so that when there's a problem, you understand loosely what your script is doing. Now, a common thing that people do when they're new game developers, and we're all guilty of this because it's the easiest way to go about coding, is putting everything in the player controller. Putting everything in the player controller is very common. So typically what we do is we open the player controller, we see this huge script, and then we just add more stuff to it. We're like, okay, let's put more stuff in here. We know this is the main script that runs when I open my game. However, you're going to have an easier time of being organized in your game and knowing which scripts do which things if you really more clearly delineate which scripts do what and then communicate between scripts when you need one script to set or do something within another. There are, of course, different ways of interacting with another script in your game. But this line I showed you guys up here, where I got a reference to the other script, is a great one. And the way you would do this, if you want to reference any script in your project, is you would, type public or private, and then you type the name of the script. So if you look up here, you see I have these other scripts open. If I, for example, wanted to use a method or set a variable in this script open door, I would write public open door and then name the variable something like OD, or maybe I should be a little bit more explicit, door open script, right? And then once I've got that set, I can do door open script dot, and then I can type the name of a variable from open door or the name of a method from that script as well. And I can run things from that script in this one. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about that to you guys and show you how I set up this game that I demoed in Narel's project. If you have questions about that, just type them in the chat. there's obviously lots you could keep troubleshooting with this. Um, so, I was thinking I had talked to Neural about camera animations, and one thing I would probably do if I wanted to make this really slick is when I triggered the car controls, I might want to trigger a camera animation that sort of slowly moved the camera until it's inside the car. That would be just a really cool visual effect. And the other thing that's a common next step in a situation like this is so, a common bug here, right? So I step in the trigger, it says press C to enter car. But, I can see that text even if I face away from the car because I'm just standing in the trigger, right? So, as long as I'm in the trigger, I can like walk away from the car and still see this. And it's a little bit counterintuitive to do that and suddenly see that text. So I have like a mini quiz for you guys. And the question is, what would I use in code to start fixing that issue? There's a particular type of Unity system that we would use to know if the player controller is looking at the car. And 10 points, there's no maximum points. Points don't earn you anything, but I'm curious if you guys know what system in Unity is used to know when you're looking at something. So we have a good bit of time left in the cast. So if you guys know, type it in, tell me what it is, and when I hear your answers, I will tell you yes or no, and I will give the answer at the end of the cast. So how do you know, again, when you're looking at something and when you're not in Unity? It's something you would do in code. So I'm curious if you guys know the name of that thing that lets you know if you're looking at something or not. So just say the word if you have a sense. And I am going to move on to Emmy's project. But before I do, I'm going to finish up my list here of tasks that I did in implementing this for Neural. The last one is this. And I am seeing in the chat, Emmy is saying raycasts. Ding, ding, ding. That is correct. Raycasts are exactly what you would use to know if you were looking at something. So, first answer is the correct one. And if I were going to keep developing Neural's project, I would set up a raycast to shoot out of the player. And I would only show that get in car text if the raycast hit the car. So I would say to myself, how do I raycast? How do I detect what the raycast is hitting? And then once I had that answer, I would be able to integrate a raycast into the code I'm already using because the basics are there. And to integrate a raycast, what I would just use instead of a trigger volume is a raycast. So excellent job, Emmy. You got that one on the first shot. So super impressed with you guys. I feel like Emmy might not be the only person that knows that. And if that's true, fantastic, because raycasts are a really powerful game development tool, and I would love to show you guys a little bit more about how to use those in a future cast. Awesome. All right. So with the time I have left, I wanted to talk about Emmy's project a little bit. Now, what I just talked about in Neural's game is an example of how I would implement a mechanic. So that was more like a game systems implementation, but you often have to set up a basic game system if you want to set up a mechanic, in other words, an interaction for the player. So I said, Neural's game doesn't have anything in it. I'm going to set some systems up and start to make it possible for a core mechanic to emerge and for Neural to start thinking about some gameplay. And to summarize what I just talked about for the last 30 minutes or so, to do that, just like Dan says, and the way I just did in the chat, you should break it down and then one step at a time, implement each task you've listed, and then think about the way you want to divide up the logic you're using across different kinds of scripts. Okay, so now I'm switching gears and I'm going to talk not about core mechanics, but about challenges. So again, we're talking here about the basic components of a game, which are, of course, mechanics, goals, and challenges. We've been talking about mechanics and switching gears to introducing challenges. I wanted to play with Emmy's game a little bit and think about an example of a challenge in Emmy's project, which would be an enemy. So I'm going to check out Emmy's game. Give me a second to bring that up, and we will talk about essentially how to script some really great enemies. And give me a second here to get this to be the right size for you guys. Okay, there we go. Woo! Okay. My goodness. All right, we're almost there. Just want the whole window in the window. All right, there it is. Great. Okay. So here's our project, which is Emmy's. And I wanted to show you guys a bit about how you would set up an enemy in this game as a challenge to introduce texture and variety into the gameplay. So, of course, as we know, Emmy's game is about shooting exploding toilet paper at people. And we're still, looking for some work here in getting the explosions to kind of clean up and to hear an explosion sound when the toilet paper lands. Emmy, I'm happy to work with you on those if you need a bit of troubleshooting. But in the meantime, I was thinking here about how I would create challenges in this game, which was, of course, to make it so that the enemies move, maybe even coming towards the player. And the way you set up an enemy in a Unity game, especially if you want them to move around in a 3D space, is with nav mesh. So if you wanted to set up nav mesh in this game and have it be the system you're using to control your enemy AI, you would need a few things. The first thing you would need to do is select basically your entire environment and set it to be what is called navigation static. So the way you would do that is up here. If you see this word static up here, and if I click on this arrow to the right here, I'm actually going to highlight nothing and then click on it again. There's an option here called navigation static, which allows that part of the game to be included when you create what's called a nav mesh. As we know, if you've worked with enemy AI before, a nav mesh is where an enemy can walk. So in Emmy's game, we've got a bit of a crazy hierarchy here with the road, we have buildings, all different kinds of stuff is laid out, which absolutely is just so fantastic looking. And if I were working with Emmy on this, what I'd say to her is, I need you to create an empty game object and make all of the components of the environment children of that empty game object. And that is because if I want to make my entire environment navigation static, I could click on that parent game object, set the parent to static, and then have that populate into all of the children of that object as well. So we're not in that situation now, so I'm going to just click on a few things. I'll click on just sort of this area here, and the street lights. You really want everything because the nav mesh is pretty smart in figuring out where they can and cannot walk, but it has to know the objects you're either including or avoiding. So I've clicked on a bunch of stuff here, right? And it's highlighting in the hierarchy. So what I would do here is I'm going to go static. See how it says yes, change children? That's what I'm talking about, right? So I'm going to go yes, change children, and then let's do this again. I'm going to go navigation static, and then everything I had highlighted and all of the children of those objects are now navigation static, which means I can put the nav mesh on them. Okay, so I'm going to click here, and you see this blue plane, which is the nav mesh I baked the last time I did this, which was right before this cast, so I could prep to show you guys this. But I'm going to click bake again, and then I click bake down here, which instantly runs. And you can see based on what I clicked on here, there's this kind of blue field now that's been automatically calculated by Unity to give a sense of where these guys can walk and where they cannot walk. And, based on what I clicked on, it did a pretty good job. I didn't catch this road, so they can't walk in that part of the road right now, but they can walk all in here, and then they're going to avoid the edges. They can't walk through this light post, and they can't walk through these cars. The buildings are also avoided. It looks like I missed this one, which means they could probably walk through that building. But you get the idea. Anything that's navigation static, it will include in its calculations. And the way this thing calculates is essentially that if you look over here, anything that's more than 45 degrees slope, they can't walk up or on it. So since this sticks straight up, for example, they can't walk there, right? And I think somewhere, one of these settings probably also dictates exactly how close to it you can get. So there's some variation in here in setting up exactly how this is generated. Advanced is also min region area, probably setting that gap. But you can kind of set up some variation to this, but usually whatever the default is a great place to start. Okay, so I've baked my nav mesh, and I'm going to actually get out of this just so I don't see this blue overlay, but I'll know now that I have a good space for these enemies to walk in. And then the next thing I need to do is set up an enemy so that they can walk on that nav mesh. So if I were to zoom in here, I'm going to click on Emmy's current enemies. And she has some different cubes here, which is a great way to prototype, by the way, because these cubes are like just fun, basic cubes that we can throw things at and kind of watch physics happen. So, props to you, Emmy, on doing this setup because this is just a fantastic, basic layout for you to prototype in. But if I wanted to make these into an enemy, I need to, I'm thinking I would probably group together these two cubes so that it kind of looks like a person. And I actually wanted to show you guys a fun trick in Unity for doing this. If you listen to one thing on this video, listen to this one thing. So Let's say, for example, that I wanted a parent game object to hold both of these cubes. We've all had the problem of creating an empty game object and it's way off somewhere in left field. And we get into this thing of dragging it over and trying to get it near these so that when I grab onto the widget that moves the parent, the widget is not really far away from the children with the meshes attached to them. So, in other words, the thing I'm talking about is when we do this and we're like, oh my gosh, where is it actually? Now I'm really confused and I wanted that to be the parent object that holds these cubes, right? It's here, you know. And then, like, we get more confused because we go, okay, I'm going to put these in this. And then, like, when I click on this, it's like here and the cubes are there. That's a really annoying situation. Like, I don't want that there. I want that on these, right? Constantly a problem, right? And then I'm like, well, now how do I move that over? It's stuck over there. And I can't move it over because when I move it, the cubes are moving with it. Ugh, what a hassle. Okay, so to solve this persistent and annoying Unity problem that we all run into, I wanted to show you like a Unity hack. So for getting a parent game object that just works with the ones you want to make as children. So I've got these two here, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to right click on this cube in the hierarchy, and I'm going to go to create empty. So this now is a child of this. And that means this game object is in the same exact location as that cube. Now, if I want to use that one as the parent, I can just drag it out on top of the cube. And what I get here is that game object now automatically has the exact position. Oops. It automatically has the exact position of the object it was just previously a child of. So this empty game object is now located in the same location as this cube. As you can see, the handle, that widget doesn't move. And what I need to do now is just strip out any weird additional things, which means I'll set rotation to 0, 0, 0 and scale to 1, 1, 1. And what I end up with here is a perfect parent game object for these two cubes. So now I can put them in there, and when I grab this one, it's right on top, just like I expect it to be, and it's aligned right along the original z-axis, which corresponds with the z-axis that the camera would look down when you load into the game. So I've got this set up now, and this is how I decided to do the setup for the enemy. I've got one in here already. You can see it here with that same exact situation. I've got two cubes. I don't know why there's an empty game object in there. Let's ignore that. And the other thing I did to set this guy up, let's see where that is. There it is. I needed to do a little bit of finagling here to actually give it the functionality it would need to interact with the nav mesh. So let's set this other guy up to be similar. I'll actually move it up here next to its brother. Hey! So if I wanted to set this one up the way I did this other one, the first thing I would do here is I'm going to take off the individual box colliders and rigid bodies that came with the two smaller cubes. And I will add just a single one right here. Now, we've got some interesting kind of rotational stuff going on here, and I think the easiest thing for me to line the box collider up is probably going to be to get rid of that rotation. Since the enemy is now going to move dynamically, it'll rotate all on its own. So I've got my basic box collider here. Let's see if I can find that handle. Yeah, I'm just going to set it up sort of whatever, right? And then I'll put my rigid body on. And in a 3D game, I often like to start by going ahead and freezing the rotation on any game object that I attach a rigid body to. Now, the reason I'm doing that is, and this goes directly out to Emmy, if you've ever played a game where something is just spiraling off into space and you don't know why, um, it's often because the game object doesn't have its rotation frozen in the rigid body and something's running into it. So, conveniently, when you select these freeze rotation boxes, it's still possible to rotate that object. It just won't rotate when things run into it. You have to do it in code. So it's just a nice way of kind of controlling the way things interact when you are not intentionally causing them to do things, but maybe physics is happening in the world of Unity. So I got my box collider, I've got my rigid body, and of course the next thing I need is I need to add a nav mesh agent. So just to be clear here, the nav mesh goes on the environment, and the nav mesh agent is what goes on the enemy. Now, this is a little bit weird. So once again, whoops, I need to actually have my nav mesh agent not stick up so high. I do believe I just have the height really big there. So I can even really get it to be like up to the height of that one. This one I think is similar. Yeah, for some reason that one has a height of 2. I don't know why that's different. That seems bizarre to me. Maybe because we've got some scaling going on here. Yeah, these are scaled in a weird way. Is that one scaled? Da, da, da. Yeah, we've got slightly different scales on here so that nav mesh was sticking up from there for some reason. But in any case, what I want here is a nav mesh agent, which is sort of like a box collider or a capsule collider, to be attached to the game object and to just about sort of generally match the size and shape of it. So if I wanted to, I could make the radius a little bit bigger, and then I could even bring the height down a little bit more, something like that. And that is actually going to control its detection of when and where it kind of can walk. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you can think of it as just sort of a basic collider that pertains specifically to navigation. Okay, so when I've got that one done, my next step is going to be to add a script. And now, given that it's about 5 o'clock, I'm not going to take you line by line through the enemy AI script I have, but I will give you a sense of what you do when you write an enemy AI script. And then for Emmy, I will go ahead and send this script along through Collab. So what I'd actually like to do right now, I'm going to delete this practice one and just stick with the one I already had. Emmy, I'd like to push this and I'd like for you to see if your collab lights up or generally just let me know what the problem you're having with your collab button is and we can troubleshoot that as I'm taking you guys through this final discussion, which is the basics of an enemy AI script. So I'm going to push this. I'll go ahead and save this test scene with my enemy in it. And happily that runs pretty quickly. Okay. So again, Emmy, just let me know what you're encountering there with the collab button. We should be able to get it fixed on this live cast. So but in the meantime, I wanted to open this enemy AI script and just give you guys a little preview of what's happening there. So hold on while I pull that up for you. Great. Okay. So here we've got the enemy AI script I pushed into Emmy's game. And there's essentially two things that you need to kind of think about when you're working with enemy AI. The first thing is, what do I want this thing to do? Just like when I was doing Neural's script, it's probably going to be helpful if you sit down and say, I'm going to write down a list of how I want this thing to work. Do I want it to wander around the level? Do I want it to run towards the player and attack the player? Do I want it to only run towards the player and attack them when they are close by? How do I want these guys to be? What kind of movement do I want to give them? And then once you've figured that out, then the next thing you would say is, how am I going to implement that? Okay, so I'm seeing Emmy saying button is still missing. So is the button fully missing, or am I seeing a button that's just like it has a gray check mark, or it says it's lost the connection with the Unity project? If it's totally gone and you just don't see the collab button at all, my general recommendation is, okay, if it's totally missing, I would definitely say you should close Unity and just open it again. Close out, sometimes Unity will just have a weird blip and it just stops working for a second. So see if closing it and opening it is going to resolve the issue. And then if not, we'll troubleshoot from there. So for this enemy, the thing I decided to do is I wanted to make them wander kind of randomly in the level. I was like, I wanted to just sort of wander by picking a place to walk to and then standing there for a little bit and then wandering somewhere else. Sort of like unsuspecting people, just enjoying walking around on the street. And then this player controller with the flaming toilet paper shows up and is like, rah! I thought that would be funny. And I also thought that's a good basis for an enemy patrol pattern that you could then later build attacking functionality on top of. So I started with that. And what I did was I actually used a script that I originally got from the instructor game that Dan and I are working on for April 2020. And if you guys have been watching the instructor game videos, you guys know that we are also doing a game that has enemy AI. So you guys can check that out. And one of the videos that will drop later this week is about this same topic. And this is the logic that I used in that game, and I imported it into Emmy's game as well. So in this script, we start by creating a method that essentially finds a point within a random sphere that centers on the enemy. So we take a random number here and we kind of multiply that by the distance here, which is actually the radius of the sphere we're drawing around the enemy. And then we find the closest point to that random point that's actually lying on the nav mesh. So this second code here, which is what these lines do, is important because if I randomly find a point that's like inside of a building or a car, I just want to move that point over and get the nearest point that's not inside a car or a building. So with my method here, what I run in update is I run a timer. And I tick this timer up until it hits the wander timer number that I've set in the inspector. So, say every 3 seconds or every 5 seconds, I call that method to find a new random point within this sphere. And then I do agent.setDestination, which is a built in method that comes with NavMesh and allows you to create this agent to move in the direction of this point right here. So all I'm doing in this enemy AI script is I'm finding a random point, and every few seconds, I'm having the enemy walk towards that point. So I'm going to show you guys how that works. But the other thing I would say, I just wanted to continue troubleshooting with Emmy before I run the game. Make sure that you are logged into Unity. So if you were to hop into Unity and click on account, you'd want to see that your name is here. Sometimes, you won't have collab because for whatever reason you've been signed out. So double check that it's the case that you're signed in, and signing in may bring the collab button back to you. I am logged in. And tell me what version of Unity you're using. I'm assuming it's the same version that I'm using because we haven't had any version control issues. Let's let Emmy check her version and I will run the game. So as you can see, my guy there, who of course has this script attached, is hanging out on the nav mesh and just sort of walks around. Yeah. And that's just nice behavior, Okay, so same version. That's interesting. Well, let's wrap this up, and hopefully we can finish out with a little bit of troubleshooting. All right. So this is how I would do it if I wanted to prototype like an enemy setup. So again, with that script I was just showing you guys, I have it attached here, and I've set my wander radius a certain size. Set the timer to be every 3 seconds, but I could make that 10 if I wanted them to move a little bit slower. And then 5 is how long. Oh, yeah, never mind. I think wait timer is the one that I would put up if I wanted to have them not be walking all the time. Like if I wanted them to stand and idle for longer, I could set this higher. So just some different parameters here coming with such a script. And, now that I've got this enemy set up, of course, I could duplicate these guys and give myself a few of them just to create some variety here. And if I were Emmy, I would probably grab this and then just delete the other ones. But of course, it's her project. And, now we've got like these sort of random people walking around. I did just notice it was acting a little bit buggy on the edge of the curb there. So one thing I would definitely do is check to see if there's a collider situation. I see it sort of goes inside the curb. So there might be some work to do in just making sure it interacts more correctly with the curb. Yeah, I'm seeing that. That's weird behavior right now. So obviously doesn't work perfectly out of the box, but what does work is we now have people walking around, moving, and I can shoot these at them, and that will be very fun. Woo! So, next steps would be to troubleshoot here, as well as introducing a 3D mesh into this guy so that it's not a prototype. And that's how you would do enemy AI. So again, that was my final thing, and that was about introducing challenges into your game. Not just thinking about mechanics, but thinking about something challenging, an obstacle for the player to contend with. Um, so with these guys, I'm thinking like I could make them faster and make them hard to hit. Getting this system working is going to give me a lot of possibility in creating different kinds of challenges in a game like this. I don't actually know what Emmy's overall game goal is, but I can see a lot of different ways that you could take this. And it would be really fun to start playing with these enemies now that they can wander around. So that is what I have for you guys on the topic of game development. And, I think from now I should ask if anyone has questions or things that I can help you guys troubleshoot. I still do want to fix this collab button thing. Emmy, I honestly, I don't know why you're not getting the collab button. Um, the other thing I was going to suggest at this point is if you could take a screenshot of Unity and send me your screenshot. Any email you have for me will be fine. Um, I'll put my Eline email in the chat just to make it easy. But what I would say is a screenshot will help me troubleshoot. We should be able to fix this at some point. I've had problems like this with Collab too, but I can't think of what it would be since we've done some of the basics. The other thing I do when I have interface issues, like something's just not working right in Unity, is I will restart the entire computer. Sometimes just a hard reset of everything can really work. So if I were having that problem, I would actually just restart the whole computer. I know you probably don't want to restart at this moment because like I'm talking and it's like I don't want to restart while I'm listening to a cast, but I think the next steps would be emailing me your a screenshot. Cool. And if you've restarted in the past few days, then that probably wouldn't be the solution. Cool. Well, send me a screenshot of your Unity, and we might be able to set up an offline, team only meeting to do some troubleshooting and fix this. Because of course, I'd like you to get the changes that I just pushed. So hopefully we'll be able to fix it. But in the meantime, I just wanted to remind you guys to head to makeroom.elinemedia.com/online-learning. In particular, checking out the blog because when I'm on the blog writing, I have been trying to summarize the stuff that we're working on and give you guys guidelines to stay on track with these projects. And we're in the phase now where we have about 10 days left in the challenge. And it's easy to get distracted and for things to, we get technical issues and then it's like, what am I supposed to be working on? Oh my gosh, my game's not even close to being done. So that blog is going to be a great place to stay organized and just check to make sure the thing you're working on is actually contributing to an end goal of making an awesome video game. So definitely head there to follow what is going on. And otherwise, I would say come back on Wednesday because on Wednesday, Dan will be hosting the cast and he will give you his patented, detailed explanations of small engineering things that only Dan can explain. I don't know about you guys, but I, for one, after I saw Dan's cast, was like, I need to start using arrays all the time. I definitely underutilize those, and they're so fantastic. I mean, you can just like create this random span of almost anything. So, I'm looking forward to see what he talks about on Wednesday. And if you guys do have any kinds of things that you might like to have him talk about on Wednesday, let me know or let us know on email, and we'll definitely try to feature answers to your questions. The other thing I wanted to say on Wednesday last week, I believe, Dan talked about audio triggers at the very beginning of the cast. And I know that material was directed mainly towards a question that Emmy had asked. So, Emmy, I would say if you missed that, because I know you joined the chat a few minutes late, Um, you can watch the video for that cast on our YouTube channel and just check the first few minutes of the cast. That's where he talked about triggering audio on a particular gameplay condition. Cool. Well, I am going to hang on here and see if I can troubleshoot this with Emmy. But this is the conclusion of the material I have for you guys for Monday night. Thank you for hanging out with me and checking out my tutorials on setting up dual controls that you can switch between and also enemy AI. So if you guys have questions about that, definitely let me know. And I will be checking your game projects in the next few days. So be working on those because the next time you see my face on this live cast, I will be playing your prototypes. Okay, so again, before I log off, Emmy, I just wanted you to hang on for a few minutes and let me know if you were able to send me to take a screenshot if you do know how to do that. If you don't, let me know because I can tell you how to take a screenshot to send my way. Okay, great. So I see your screenshot there, and the next thing I would suggest in troubleshooting this would be, whoops, let's do this. In Unity, click on this and tell me what you see that shows up in the inspector. So again, the little button that looks like a cloud. Services. Yep. I meant to say services. Yep, you can send a screenshot. That would be fantastic. Okay. So I don't have a ton of. That is so weird. I'm really surprised that you don't have it because um, normally what happens is you'll lose connection with the project and then that button disappears temporarily and you can reestablish your connection. And the final thing I wanted to confirm before we do anything else is you have restarted your computer within the last since you've had this problem and it didn't fix it, right? Okay. So, the the next thing that I typically do when I have these problems is I will delete the project off of my computer and download it again from Hub. So, the way you would do that would be to find the folder containing the project on your computer hard drive. You're not going to lose the project because I have it on my computer and it's also stored in the cloud under Collab. So, what you could do is delete that folder and then wait a few minutes until the project is grayed out in Unity Hub. And when it's grayed out, you should be able to click on the cloud icon again and download it into your hard drive once again and open the editor with the project. I'm thinking that should fix it. It usually fixes most of these kinds of issues. It'll just take you a few minutes because you'll have to download the assets in the project again. But honestly, at this stage, I can't think of what else is going on, and that's the thing that I would try if I was on a laptop back at our studio at EdAlliance. So I think that's what we should do. And I just can reassure you, you're not going to lose the project if you do that. But it'll just create a totally clean slate version of it because you'll be pulling it out of the cloud in the state it's in on my computer and resetting everything up. So I think that's what you should try. That'll probably take a bit longer than I want to stay on this cast. So my suggestion is go ahead with that and just be in touch with me over email. And if that doesn't fix it, we'll continue to troubleshoot until we get something worked out. Um, I'm always available to do one-on-one calls as well. And, um, again, if it's still like this in the next couple days, we can definitely fix it. But it'll probably take you a few minutes to download the assets and just get the whole project reconfigured and set up on your computer. But just delete the folder, wait, open Hub, download it again, put it in the same place on your computer, and my hope is that you'll be good to go. All right. So if you're still listening, congratulations, you've made it to the true end. Emmy, I hope we can get this fixed. And in the meantime, I'm excited about your game and basically all the games that people are making for this. So I can't wait to see what you guys work on this week. Um, this is a good week to push. So, on that note, I am going to sign off the live cast. Email me, be in touch, and tune in on Wednesday at 4 o'clock to hear Dan talk all things coding and engineering. All right, guys, thank you so much.